Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. What impact will the opposition's India alliance as well as the BJP's expanded NDA alliance have on Indian politics? And secondly, what are the measures, what are the steps that the India alliance must take to put itself in a position to effectively challenge the Bharatiya Janata Party in next year's national elections? Those are two key issues I should explore today with the Chief Editor of Studies in Indian Politics and the Co-Director of Lokniti's Program for Comparative Democracy, Professor Suhas Palshikar. Professor Palshikar, in a recent insightful article for the Indian Express, you began by describing the BJP, who has revamped and expanded the NDA, as an attention-seeking child. So is there a sense in which this meeting of the new NDA was intended as a spoiler for the opposition conclave happening the same day?
Oh, yes. Attention seeking in the sense that I thought they wanted simply to deflect attention from the opposition conclave at Bengaluru. But to specifically your question, I think the idea was to create confusion in the minds of many smaller parties as well, so that they would really be not sure whether to join a powerful ruling party or a prospective opposition front. Otherwise, I don't see any reason why it was timed right at the time of the second conclave of the opposition parties.
Let me take that thought one step further. The expanded 38-party NDA, and I'll talk about that before we talk about the alliance. The Express paper reports that of the 38 parties, 10 did not participate in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections. The Hindu says 16 did not win a single MP. And then apparently of the remainder, 8 together got just 9 seats. So given that they actually haven't performed very well or haven't bothered to contest, how powerful is this alliance?
Partly this alliance, NDA, the new NDA, is cosmetic. It is only to show to the public that, look, we do have enough number of parties with us, and probably even more numerically than the opposition parties who are coming together. The only advantage perhaps could be in seats where there is the margin of victory are very small, and such small players can make a difference. If they shift their votes or if they get a few votes, the opposition's entire game plan can be somewhat spoiled. So there is a slight tactical move in that and a larger cosmetic move in that.
That sounds as if you're suggesting that the logic behind this patchwork quilt of parties, if I can use that phrase, is explained by the fact that many of these smaller parties, even if they don't have MPs or even if they didn't actually contest the elections, give the NDA a presence in geographies and perhaps in demographies where the BJP on its own would be weak. And I imagine Bihar is one such, possibly Maharashtra another.
Yes, Kerala also for that matter, because there is a small party from Kerala, and the point simply is that in the Lok Sabha elections, the negotiations would be you shift your votes to us. In assembly, we will give you seats. And therefore, by that logic, I see that the next assembly rounds would be far more complicated because of a fragmented party system in many states.
This brings me to the article that you wrote for the Express, where you identified two implications and consequences of this expanded NDA alliance. Let's go through those one by one. First, you say, the renewed consolidation of the NDA indicates further fragmentation of state parties. It also indicates more instability at state level when assembly elections take place. And it suggests the rise of more particularistic caste and regional identities. I imagine that your beginning point is a reference to the splitting of the Shiv Sena and the NCP. But could you explain this point more fully for the audience?
Yes, both. I mean, Shiv Sena and NCP split is obviously in my mind, where you fragment parties, you create factions. But then there are also the Suhel Samaj party, for example, which is a party of a small demographic component of the society. And with such components, you can fragment the electorate further. This can be counterproductive because this means, as I said, and you read it out, more particularistic identities would be consolidated through this process. So this goes against the idea of consolidating larger blocks of communities. Instead of that, we have caste parties now.
And let me pick up on something you said earlier. The understanding between the BJP and the small parties is that you transfer your votes to us, to the BJP at the Lok Sabha level, we will transfer our votes to you at the assembly level. Is there a sense there that the BJP is trading off its Lok Sabha performance vis-a-vis its assembly performance?
Not necessarily, because they would give seats to the smaller parties in the assembly elections only where they are weak themselves. That's one. And secondly, who knows? After the Lok Sabha elections, they can even just drop these parties. They won't care for them. I have been arguing consistently that the larger game plan of the BJP in the second NDA phase, not in the Vajpayee NDA phase as much, has been to neutralize state-level players so that they have a clean ground to play with the Congress, the game with the Congress. So I think ultimately it's going to hurt the smaller parties, which they don't realize right now.
In fact,
they don't go for it.
In fact, what you're suggesting, Professor Palshikar, is that the small parties could end up being taken for a ride, particularly if after the national elections, they are jettisoned by the BJP. They will have been made use of, but got very little back in return.
That is quite possible.
And as you add, at this moment, the small parties haven't realized that they could be taken for a ride.
That's right, yeah.
Let's then come to the second implication that you write about. And that second implication of the expanded NDA is to do with Hindutva. You say, aggressive Hindutva does not keep away many smaller players from joining the BJP, and therefore, in the long run, the politics of Hindutva will have a reach that electoral setbacks alone will not be able to undo. So this expanded NDA could end up further embedding Hindutva into Indian politics. Is that right?
Yes, that's the more likely possibility. And we actually have historical evidence for it. The BJP, when it was not very strong in certain states, it literally piggybacked on the then, what was it, Lok Shakti party in Karnataka and got a foothold there. The same is true of Odisha, the same is true of West Bengal. And now with these smaller parties coming together, the atmosphere which would be created is that BJP is an acceptable party. You don't have to keep away the BJP for its Hindutva. And that is how it goes beyond the electoral exercise.
It also means that everything else associated with Hindutva, majoritarianism and the othering of minorities, Muslims in particular, will also get embedded deeper into our system.
Sure. In Maharashtra, I can tell you from my own definite experience that smaller parties, which are now part of the NDA, were originally claiming that they were not Hindutva parties. But now they are keeping quiet and riding equally quietly with the BJP, even when the evidence is there about its Hindutva inclination.
And this means, as a corollary, that not only will Hindutva be embedded further into the system and become acceptable, but the fight against it will become more difficult because everyone will be espousing some or other form of Hindutva.
Sure. That's the larger effect of this revived NDA.
Now, as you point out in your Express article, increasingly, as of today, this election, the one that's going to happen next year, looks as if it will be a battle between two coalitions, the India coalition, as it's called, and the NDA. And you point out in your article that the India vote share is roughly similar to the BJP's vote share in 2019. And then you go on to say that a lot will depend on how the Congress performs in states like UP, Telangana, Andhra, and Orissa, where major regional parties have not joined either alliance. But the problem is these are states where Congress's performance has been poor for several years, if not longer. Does this mean that the dice is loaded against India?
Yes. The most important if is how does the Congress perform? But otherwise, I have argued, and I will keep arguing for some time at least now, that unless you get some of these state level players on board, the BSP in Uttar Pradesh, or the YSR Congress party in Andhra Pradesh, or KCR's party, the BRS now in Telangana, BJD also in Odisha. These are important players and you can't wish away them. Congress in Odisha, for example, was on the third position last time. So obviously the Congress can't take on the BJP very easily without a collaboration with the BJD. And that is going to be a stumbling block for the India, the new alliance.
In fact, how major a stumbling block it is revealed in your article when we look at just one simple fact. In these four states, which are basically UP, Telangana, Andhra, and Orissa, the parties that the Congress needs to, or the India alliance needs to forge some understanding with, are the Bahujan Samaj Party, the Bharat Rashtra Samiti, the YSR Congress, and the Biju Janata Dal. But it's very unlikely that any of these parties will actually forge an alliance with India as long as India has a strong central Congress connection. So the need is there. But against that need, there's this huge disincentive, the fact that at the center of India is Congress. That will put them off.
Absolutely right. Either the Congress has to change its strategy vis-a-vis these parties, or they have to live with the reality that they will be away from the new coalition. I don't think there is any third possibility there.
So let me underline this point. The four states which will prove the greatest challenge for India are the four states where Congress A performs pretty badly and has done so for decades. And secondly, those are four states where the chances of India forging an alliance with the major regional parties is minimal. So these four states, at worst, could tilt towards the BJP. The BJD did once upon a time actually ally with them. And there's some talk that perhaps the party in Andhra, the YSR Congress, might ally with the BJP. That would be the worst thing. But the best is that these regional parties stay aloof of both people. But it still leaves the India alliance with a huge hole it can't fill.
Yes, I think from the perspective of India alliance, the strategy would be just wait and watch. Let these parties win seats in the Lok Sabha. And then a post-election coalition might be possible with them. Because once these parties get seats, they would be in a position to negotiate with the Congress and the India alliance. So I think the India alliance would be thinking on these lines.
But that would mean that the India alliance must at least end up somewhere close to 200.
Sure enough, yes. Only then they can negotiate with them. Exactly 50 seats. Right now they have 53. So supposing they win the same number of seats this time too, the India alliance has to cross 200 mark. Only then there can be a possibility of a post-election arrangement.
Which means that the threshold for the India alliance to become relevant and reach out to these four parties is a very high threshold. 200 is probably way more than they have at the moment.
Sure. It's an uphill task.
Now, against this background, in your Express article, you identified what you call 3 tasks that the India alliance must undertake in the months to come. I'll go through each of those one by one. First, you point out, because the alliance is dominated by state parties whose fight is against a domineering center created by the BJP, the new front, as a result, needs to come up with a program to protect and rejuvenate federalism. And you point out it needs to do this zealously. You say if it doesn't do this, many of these regional parties won't have a meaningful stake in the alliance. I think I understand what you're saying, but could you spell it out more fully?
Yes, you see, this alliance, though, as you said, Congress is at the fulcrum of this alliance, it seems, but it has to sort of keep away from it and let these state parties talk more. And when they talk of democracy, that discussion of democracy has to reach to the level where you talk of center-state relations. All the state parties which are in power currently have had problems with the Modi government in center. And therefore, federalism will be an important programmatic attraction to them. Not only that, someone like KCR, for example, has had a tension-ridden relation with the central government. Therefore, a federalist program would even possibly attract some of the ruling parties which are not part of this current dispensation. A party like Akali Dal, which is slightly sitting on the fence currently, could be weighed in because of the federalist argument. So federalism, both tactically and as a democratic principle, is an important element which this alliance would be identified inevitably with the Congress, because Congress is the larger party in that. But the reality is that the other parties, the state parties, constitute the major strength of the India alliance. Now, many of them are ruling in different states and even otherwise have been at the receiving end from the central government. Even the Congress, for that matter, has had a very bad relationship with the central government wherever it is ruling in the states. So it would be wise both for the Congress and for the state parties to emphasize that they stand for federalism. Now, federalism is not just a principle that one is talking about, but the actual relationship which would govern center-state relations. That is where these parties would have a tactical advantage, but also a theoretical advantage, because federalism is connected to the very idea of democracy in India. Finally, federalism is important because we need to think of federalism beyond constitution. If the India alliance talks of federalism, it would be able to, in a sense, coordinate this idea of nationalism with the various regional identities and linguistic identities of the different people of India. And that's why I think it would be both prudent politically, but democratically and ideologically very valuable if this alliance upholds the principle of federalism.
Are there 2 corollaries that flow from what you're saying? First, that this alliance will be knitted together more closely if it stood for transferring greater power to the states and reducing the control of the center, because all the state parties would buy into that. Congress may have a problem, but in the end, Congress would need their support. And the second thing that would knit this alliance is if it was clear, and there was no doubt, that Congress is going to vote against the Delhi Ordinance when it comes up in Parliament. Both of those would strengthen the federal spirit of this alliance.
Absolutely. And I keep harping on this, that this is not tactical alone, but even the tactical advantage should be taken into consideration, because that emphasis would somewhere attract parties like the BRS, KCR's party in Telangana, because it had a difficult relationship with the center from time and again. That's why I think they need to tread very carefully on this and come out with a federalist program.
And this could even help reach out to the BJD, because the BJD is very careful about protecting its authority in Orissa, and this would help reach out to them.
Sure.
Now, the second task you write about, and I'm quoting you, is that the united opposition needs to come up with a program or policy outline that would attract the voter. And you think the best way to do this is to clearly define which social segments it is specifically seeking to align with. And you believe that it's most likely to succeed if it focuses on Dalits, Adivasis, small farmers, urban poor, and the vast numbers of unorganized earners in the service sector. To my mind, that's beginning to sound a bit like Congress ka haath Aam Aadmi ke saath.
It might sound like that, but my criticism of Aam Aadmi Ka Saath concept was and would be that it is too vague. Speaking of Aam Aadmi, it shies away from actually talking about the poor. And in our economy, for various reasons, this precarious position, what a famous scholar has called the precariat, that precarious position is experienced by a very large number of working population. They are working, and yet they are not sure of their work, they are not sure of their earnings, they are not sure of their future. It is this population that needs to be targeted. In our country, the idea of Aam Aadmi somehow has been hijacked by the middle classes. The middle classes think that they are the Aam Aadmi, particularly since globalization and 1991 reforms. The Aam Aadmi idea has come to mean the so-called middle classes, which are not middle, slightly upper. And therefore, they need to define their idea of Aam Aadmi more carefully if they want to go back to that. But yes, I agree that it sounds like Aam Aadmi Ka Saath, but it should be the real Aam Aadmi, the Aam Aadmi who is at the bottom half of the society.
But you sound a note of caution as well in targeting what you call the precariat, the people whose existence is precarious. You add that the India alliance needs to offer something real and in the near term, rather than platitudes about the unknown future. Only then will they appeal to this lot of people, and they could well be 200-300 million that we're talking about, and also only then will they give these people an alternative to choose other than Hindutva. The problem is that Mr. Modi will come back and call these Revlis.
Yes, and that is why they have to themselves go beyond the idea of Revlis. You know, there has been this shower of too many welfare measures. They look attractive. They are valuable too, but they are valuable only in the ameliorative sense. They immediately ameliorate the ills of certain social sections. They don't look at the structural problems that the society is facing. And therefore, let's see for a moment, forget about concrete programs or Revlis. Where should the attack begin? The attack will have to begin on not the idea of Revlis, but on the idea of a nexus between the government and corporate houses. The inability of the government to control corporate houses and to give them a free hand is something that would immediately catch the imagination of the public if expressed properly. That's one thing. The other thing is our idea of social justice from the 1990s often stopped at the caste question. Whereas the idea of fairness or social justice has to cross the caste question and say that we have to bring together the class and caste questions. Now, this is theoretical, and this might sound theoretical because, after all, as an ex-professor, I can only be abstract. I am not a politician, but politicians do have better imagination than scholars. So they need to think through this problem and come up with better ideas. In 2004, they were right in bringing Aam Aadmi because then the BJP was speaking of shining India. Similarly, now in the times of Amrit Kal, they have to bring out some new Amrit to the public. That Amrit which the public can actually feel, touch, and experience quickly.
It's very interesting that you talked at the beginning of that answer about the need to restructure the relationship between the government and corporate houses. As you said it, what came to my mind was Adani and Ambani. And then the other thought that came to my mind is that this is sending a symbolic message to the audience, a bit like abolition of privy purses and nationalization of banks did in 71. It's a message that may not make a major difference immediately to the lives of voters, but it suggests that the government is on their side and caring about them. Am I right in making that allusion?
I think yes and no, both. Yes, in the sense that some slogans, some symbolic actions are always necessary in democratic politics. But democratic politics, to be durable, has to also show that they're ready to go beyond that. And that's why I said that this business of controlling either Ambani's corporate interests or Adani's corporate interests is definitely important. But going beyond that, they probably need to go back to the first stint of the UPA, where the idea was welfare is not a measure, welfare is a right. That discourse needs to be brought in at the theoretical level. That I'm not, as a prime minister, giving you your health card. Health is your right, and therefore you need to have a health card and a health facility. That discourse in Indian regional languages can be put across. I trust that that is possible.
This ought not to be too difficult for Congress, because this was the language of the National Advisory Council under Sonia Gandhi in the first UPA government. Surely their memories can stretch back to remember how they phrased it and how they themselves were responsible for creating the concept of rights. They have to now create new rights that appeal to people. Let's come to the third task you identify, because in some ways that is perhaps the most challenging. You say the opposition will need clarity on why it's keen on displacing the BJP. Mere Modi baiting is not going to be a convincing answer. You say the opposition will need to clarify what it is that they are opposed to. And this is where the task becomes both abstract and intellectual. How easy will it be for India to convert these abstract thoughts into meaningful ones for ordinary voters?
Yes, it would be very tough for them, but it would be tough for them also because there seems to be a tendency among our political class to become Chota Modis. So they need to themselves overcome this idea. And yes, an introspection on the part of someone like Mamata, for example, would be absolutely necessary, or Arvind Kejriwal for that matter, would be absolutely necessary. Are we simply imitating the Modi model of leadership? And can we offer a more humane and democratic model of leadership? That's the challenge for some of these parties. KCR in Telangana is nothing else than a local Modi image. And therefore, this is something where the reform is more internal to the participants of India. Unless you do that, you can't criticize Modi for being whatever you want to call him, a megalomaniac, an authoritarian, whatever. So that's not really abstract. It is something more inner that they have to do. The abstract part of it is cultural. I agree with you that the abstract part is cultural. And that's why I thought that rather than talking of Hindutva and attacking Hindutva, in every event of wherever a poor and marginalized community or person has been attacked, volunteers of the India should go and stand with them. It's no use sitting in Delhi and then saying that we stand with you. What is important is actually your workers locally there should stand with Muslims who are getting lynched, with Dalits who are getting harassed and against whom there are atrocities, Adivasis whose properties have been taken away by local goons. That is where you have to show in action. And there is 8-9 months to elections. So I'm not saying this is something you have to do on election eve. But as a habit, India will have to cultivate this habit of not simply making statements, but standing with those sections.
I'll pick up on this point because I think it's a very important one in a moment's time. But let me first raise something else. You talked about the challenge of internally changing yourselves. The Mamtas, the KCRs, the Arvind Kejriwals. They've only got 8 months in hand to do it. Can they do it in 8 months? I mean, it's not just that they have to change themselves, they have to convince others that they've changed. So that's an even bigger thing.
Again, I would say it's not impossible. By simply giving more powers to, let's say, their ministers and their colleagues in the party, at least the first step can be made. Definitely not using any laws that they are now criticizing. Like, for example, if I tweet something in West Bengal, there should be a guarantee that the Mamata government will not take action against me. That would give a small message to the speaking classes, the so-called opinion makers, that things are possibly changing. Currently, what is happening is that there is too much criticism of your own governments, the opposition's governments in different states, not on policy matters, but on either performance matters or on behavior matters. And that needs to be avoided.
Let's then come to that point about inclusiveness. Inclusiveness, as you know, is at the very heart of the India Alliance. It's what the second I stands for. Also, this is presumably their way of countering Hindutva. But the question is, how easy will it be to put across this narrative of inclusiveness in a country where 80% of the population is Hindu, and worse still, where many Hindus have been convinced in the last 9 years that A, they're getting marginalized, and some have even begun to believe, illogical though it may seem, that their religion is in danger. So how easy will it be to push the message of inclusiveness against this background of Hindus fearing they're being marginalized?
The kind of response Rahul Gandhi got during his Bharat Jodo Yatra and the goodwill that is created after that should convince the India Alliance leaders that it is at least not a thankless task. If they really do this, that is to say, make themselves and their parties inclusive. And inclusion doesn't have to be only about Muslims. Inclusion is about women, the simple large constituency of voters, and a genuinely marginalized section of our community. So you have to stand with women. You have to make sure that women are given more tickets. You have to make sure that women are decision makers in your party at the local levels. Dalits, Adivasis, the same would apply. So I think this inclusiveness is not just ideological nor just symbolic. You don't have to shout from the rooftop that we will include Muslims. You don't have to do that. It's only a question of how we can connect to our neighbors. That neighborliness has been lost in India since 1992. So, yes, it's a difficult task. It has been 3 decades since India has been slowly losing this inclusiveness and neighborliness with your neighbors, with your co-citizens. To bring it back in 8 months' time is just not possible, but you should be seen as making efforts. A statement coming from Bengaluru is not enough. My local Congress people should be seen as behaving in that inclusive manner. My local, let's say, TMC people should be seen as behaving in that inclusive manner. That is where their task is more internal. They have to really put their heads together and find out what they can do.
I notice in today's paper that Mamata Banerjee is proposing to take a delegation of chief ministers and maybe even party heads to Manipur. Would that be a way of symbolizing this message of inclusiveness? That we all go together to an area where, until he said 30 seconds worth of commentary yesterday, the Prime Minister for nearly 80 days had nothing to say at all. Would that be a good start?
It would be a good start, no doubt. I think it was brilliant on the part of Rahul Gandhi, though the media didn't give enough publicity to it, to have visited Manipur already. And that is something to the advantage of the Congress party. You can take a delegation of the chief ministers, but I think a very simple first step could have been yesterday itself, the India should have come out with a public apology to the women of this country for the indignities and assure them that this is why we exist. We stand to protect you. Going to Manipur, yes, a visible thing because then television cameras would go there. But in today's newspapers, I would have wanted a public apology from the India Alliance to women of this country for the indignities resulting out of BJP's rule in Manipur.
That would have
is
been a
politics.
that would have been a very powerful message, not only because it would have appealed to the people of Manipur and the Kukis and the tribals in particular, but also it would have been superb politics because it would have shown up and embarrassed the Modi government. And
Yeah,
it would have...
Sure, but it's not, I don't think it is only limited to embarrassing the Modi government. They are in an embarrassing position. The question is, can the other alliance give a genuine assurance to everyone? Manipur is probably the dirtiest thing to have happened so far. But that doesn't mean that women in our country are safe, that women in public life are can behave in a dignified manner. They are always in danger of character assassination. And therefore, a statement would have been necessary that we will not let this happen.
This is where the sort of political messaging requires imagination and sensitivity and thinking. It's different to what Indian political parties have done previously. They need to rethink how they put across that message. You talked about the need for imagination. This is a wonderful example of it.
I think that should be done, and some such things need to be done, not for embarrassing Modi, not for only winning elections, but to giving an assurance to the citizens of this country that a different politics is possible. This idea that there is no alternative to BJP or Modi, if you want to puncture it, then you have to genuinely stand for a different politics. That's the point.
This brings me to my last question, and it's also how you ended your article for the Express. You said there, the opposition must remember that the business of shaping India is not a matter of arithmetic, but of politics. The arithmetic, in a sense, is in place because you've got a 26-party alliance. How confident are you that the politics will fall into place? You've just given me a striking and memorable example of something they could have done but didn't even think of doing. How confident are you that they're capable of reimagining their politics to offer a credible alternative to Narendra Modi?
You know, with all the enthusiasm of India coming into being, frankly, I am only somewhat skeptical of their quick reflexes politically. Everyone in our country, and in a sense that is because of BJP, everyone has been lazy in their politics. And that laziness means that you quickly don't respond with your imagination. In making mistakes, you are quick. But in making an imaginative political move, you take a long time. And that's why I don't think, while I think that this business of India should be seen as politics, not just electoral calculations. And I'm afraid that they would fully do that or fully do justice to themselves, what they have done so far between Patna and Bengaluru.
But the challenge is to reimagine politics. And of that, we don't know how capable they are.
I don't think they still have that urge to do things immediately. Because, you know, the trap is you have to have imagination, and you can't, I mean, politicians can't wait like you and I for 24 hours to find out some new idea. They have to do it quickly, imaginatively, but at the same time, it must be authentic or genuine. That is the politics that we require. One expects India to do that. One fears that they might be lazy in doing that.
The other thing is that it is very easy to describe what they need to do, probably very difficult to deliver it because you need a combination of intelligence, instinct, and also political sound sense. Some people have it and some simply don't.
And coordination.
And coordination. I thank you, Professor Palshikar, for an extremely enlightening interview and opening our eyes in particular to two things: the nature and consequences of the NDA alliance and what it means for the country, but more importantly, the challenges that lie ahead for the India alliance and what it has to do if it is really going to put a challenge to the BJP next year. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you indeed. Pleasure.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.